action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing, advertising and beyond. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chinwag with. It's like Pokemon Go, with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp, and I'm Giles Edwards, co-founder and MD. Today we release arguably the greatest part 2 since The Empire Strikes Back. This episode being the second half of our chat with a man who's one of the most highly awarded, revered and talented copywriters and creative directors on the planet. The one and only George Tannenbaum. We paused part 1 after talking about ageism and Hitler being left-handed, but we now return to our chat with the former executive creative director and copy chief at Ogilvy as we talk about the current state of copywriting, the great American journalist and author Robert Caro, and the Pirate King, Rob Schwartz. If you haven't caught part 1, make sure you do before feasting your ears on this. The rest of our chat with George. So let's quickly talk about copywriting. I don't want to do you a disservice because, Christ, we could talk all day and should talk all day to you about copywriting. But are there parallels with what we've just talked about with ageism and generally, if we can be so broad as to say the bullshit in the industry? Has that crept into what we do as, you know, the real creativity in copywriting?
Well, you know, I quote a lot in the blog. There's an American writer. He's won 2 Pulitzer Prizes, and I've seen him speak maybe 10 times. His name is Robert Caro. He's won 2 Pulitzer Prizes, 2 National Book Awards, and he's written the book about the making of New York City called The Power Broker, and then a 4-volume, probably 3,000 pages on President Lyndon Johnson. He's working on the 5th volume. It's a race between him and the great timekeeper because he's 85. He tells a story when he was at Princeton University. He was in a writing class. He had a courtly old Southern gentleman who was the professor, who was a noted writer at the time. And Caro would always, you know, they get 2 weeks to write something, and Caro would always wait till the night before. And he was always able to write fast the way he tells it. And he would sit down and he would type a story. And he'd always get A's because he's an excellent writer, A being the highest mark. And he tells the story how in his last session, the teacher calls him in. I forget the man's name. And he says something, and this might be an exact quote. I'm going to do it as close as I can. He said, "Mr. Caro, I don't know what your goals are. I don't know what you intend to do with your life." You know, he's 21 at the time, let's say. "But you will never achieve what you want to achieve if you continue to think with your fingers." And, you know, if you think about, and he narrows, I've taken a lot of what he's written and narrowed it down into some kind of functional rules, or not rules, behaviors for myself. And one of them is time equals truth. It takes time to get to the truth. And again, if I were to do this, is a terrible example because I'm sitting in my basement, but it's the only thing in front of me is this obsolete oil burner we have down here. We just bought an old house in Connecticut. I don't know anything about oil burners. So if I have to write an ad for this oil burner and it's due in 2 hours, I have no time to make truth. I'm just going to say, stay cozy, warm all winter long. The coldest day, you'll feel warm. And you know what? That might suck. That might not suck. But it's going to be like, if there's 100 lines about oil burners, 97 of them are going to be just like that. Yeah. 99 of them are going to be just like that. Because I don't really know anything about oil burners. I don't know what's important. I don't know what happens when they go bad. I don't know anything. So I haven't taken the time to find the truth. And that's what we produce today. I'm not blaming the writers. I'm blaming the function. I'm blaming the system. I'm blaming, Malcolm Gladwell would say you need 10,000 hours. I could tell you going back to baseball, you need to play 1,000 games before you get good. And I need to learn this oil burner. I need to learn how long they last, how thick the steel is, how, what kind of floor they work best, you have to put it on. I need to understand shit. That's the planners don't know that. Wikipedia doesn't know it. You only know it by talking to old oil burner installers and people who live in a house for 97 years and their grandparents lived in it before them, and old reliable here kept going in the winter of '02. you, you know but we're not set up to do that anymore.
No, and that's why you believe in factory tours.
Yeah, and on top of it, I think it gets worse because today no one challenges anyone who says people don't read anymore and people don't have attention spans. And I would hear it at that place I worked, what was it, Ogilvy or something?
Yeah, that's it.
And I would say, you tell me people don't have attention spans, and every morning I hear you coming in and talking to people about the 7 hours of binge watching you did the night before. Is that an attention span? Because it sure seems that way to me. And, I know, for instance, the Times, New York Times, which had 0 digital subscribers 10 years ago, has 5 million today. So someone's reading. So you're telling me things because you hear them as wisdom or I forget the word. But you haven't given me any proof. And so we're about to have hopefully an election in this country. And, if I were Joe Biden, I would run a 4-page, an 8-page, a 16-page ad of 20,000 words saying exactly what I'm going to do on every issue. And I'd publish it in every major newspaper in the United States. And when Donald Trump says, you said blah, 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 I say, no, Donald, actually on page 7, line 42, codicil 9, I said this. And it's there, Donald, in black and white. That's what I'm going to do. I think that has value.
Yeah.
Whether or not you read it, there's a visual quality to it that says, if you bought an $88 bottle of wine, and I decide, if that's your thing, and I decide to put an 8-page thing tied to the wine bottle, and I talk to you about the soil and the farmer and the family and the horses that pull the frickin' plows, I'll sell you that wine. I mean, part of it is you're interested already. I'm not denying that, but I think we need to take time to learn shit, and I don't think anyone's given the time, and they haven't had the training. They haven't been told it's important anymore, because I don't think they teach. I know they don't teach that in ad school.
Yeah, no, they don't. I know that from a couple of grads we've had on our books recently. I've got a couple of listener questions for you, George.
Uh-oh.
So asking the general public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names, is notoriously fraught with danger. But we do have 2 for you. So Jim asks, he says, your ad-aged blog post on Valentine's Day mentioned that after parting ways with Ogilvy, you've rediscovered your love for advertising. Why do you think that is, and what do you love about it?
Okay, let me see if I can find that, so I can, because it's been a little while since Valentine's Day. Well, you know what? I think, when you're at an agency for a long time, you get caught up in the bullshit of the agency rather than the craft of the craft. And I'm not saying craft to be pretentious. I'll tell you, I just finished a really amazing book last night called The Saddest Words. The subtitle is William Faulkner's Civil War. William Faulkner probably isn't too big in the UK.
Yeah.
But once he had some success, He made a little money in Hollywood. He had a couple of novels. You know what? He won the Nobel Prize. What am I talking about? He won the Nobel Prize in 1949. So he said, you know what? Now I can write. I don't have to worry about paying the rent. I don't have to worry about my publishers. Now I can write. And I think when I left Ogilvy, I don't have to rationalize why I want to spend 16 hours learning about oil burners. I can just learn. I can say to the client, I need to learn about your product before I try to write about your product. And you know what? No one's really going to dispute that. Except in an agency, they will, because there's going to be a project manager saying, well, you're only scoped for 4 hours. So, I found this poem, and this might be an answer. I know my answers are never blithe or quick. I'm not good at reading poems, but I'm going to read it. It says, when someone deeply listens to you, it's like holding out a dented cup you've had since childhood and watching it fill up with cold, fresh water. When it balances on top of the brim, you are understood. When it overflows and touches your skin, you are loved. When someone deeply listens to you, the room where you stay starts a new life, and the place where you wrote your first poem begins to glow. It's as if gold has been discovered when someone deeply listens to you. Your bare feet are on the earth, and a beloved land that seemed distant is now at home with you. That, I think, is what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
We're supposed to deeply listen. And I think both the client and the viewer, the reader, are going to feel listened to if you listen. And I think that's the reason behind our disdain for advertising today. No one listens.
Perfect. Question 2 then, George, is from Sarah. She says, you've been vocal about the deterioration of copywriting, even saying, I think journalists are writing better headlines than copywriters these days. With a rising clickbait and fake news, is this really true?
Well, it depends. It depends on what you're reading, and one of the privileges of blogging is I don't have to fact check anything. I read 2 newspapers or 3. Sometimes I read the Washington Post sometimes, but usually just the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. And they're not as clickbaity as like the BuzzFeeds of the world. And when I wrote that line, I had read an article in the Wall Street Journal about Warren Buffett, and it was called Warren Buffett and the $300,000 haircut. And I said to myself, well, that's how do you not read that? If you're a journal reader anyway, and you basically give a shit about investing and money, that's a pretty good headline. It's startling. And the sub had clarified it. So the hierarchy of the communication was fantastic.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to look at the ads I read, and I do most of my reading online, except Sunday we get the Sunday paper. But I don't recall an ad where I saw a similarly good headline. And it's idiosyncratic, surprising, silly, quizzical. So, I know there's a lot of clickbaity things. I've written about, 21 ways to make ice cubes. The last one will really blow your mind. It's like, yeah, but you know what? That's a betrayal of trust too. And so I don't, to Sarah, a lot of times, because we're all going through our freaking news feeds, and you'll see something like, can you believe this reaction shot from Melania? Or Boris Johnson said what? And you go, okay, I'll click on it. And then you get to it, and it's like, well, he stepped on a piece of gum and he looked at his shoe, and can you believe his expression? He goes,
you've overpromised there.
Yeah, you're a liar. You've lied to me. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a question between, journalism is clickbait and advertising as honest. I think it's respect for the reader. And I think that journalists in at least the two newspapers I read have had to show respect for the consumer's intelligence and time in a way that I'm not 100% sure those words ever come into the calibration of creativity by either creative directors, by creative directors, by account people, by planners, or by clients, or by clients, by clients, by clients, by clients, by the time it gets up the ladder or down the ladder, whichever way it goes.
Yeah.
So I don't know that respect for the consumer ever enters into the picture. It's all like, what do we want to say? Well, there's a difference.
Yeah, I also think as long as pay for clicks exists, I mean, clicks are such a blunt metric, but as long as that does exist, then clickbait will exist.
Yeah.
Therein lies a big issue. And equally, Sarah uses the word better, and we can talk about good headlines, but I think it's important also to clarify the difference between a good headline, meaning an effective headline that does the job, and a good headline that you just think is a nice headline.
Yeah, when I was a kid, and I just got done teaching an advertising class at Ad House in New York, over Zoom. When I was a kid in college, there's always a bulletin board, maybe 4 feet by 6 feet. If a kid, kid lives in Cleveland and is going home to Cleveland, anybody have a ride to Cleveland this week, for Labor Day weekend or something? And I'd say about 5% of these, they were usually handwritten. It was pre-computer, and they'd be, pinned up to the wall. And so if it's the papers is A4, 8.5 by 11, whatever, somebody would write, in large 72-point type, the word sex. And then underneath it in small type, it would say, now that I got your attention, I need a ride to Cleveland. Well, that's clickbait. And that just pisses you off because you got that's gratuitous. That's not respectful. And, respect, honesty, are the hallmarks of civilization and communication. And so, if you want to do clickbait, that's fine. I'm going to try not to read your magazine because I don't want to be treated like that. The same way I don't want to hear from Verizon or Orange, whatever the telco is, that I can get a month of, unlimited service for $49.95, and then I go into the store and it's $89.95, and I say, what about the commercial? Well, that's if you're left-handed and stand on one leg. You lied to me. Now, those are monopolies. You can't do anything about it. But you're still a liar to me.
Yeah, the trouble is you can't measure that bit, can you? You can't measure getting pissed off with those clickbaits, but what you do get a measure, albeit an ambiguous digital measure, then sends signal back to the people who placed the ad that someone clicked on the ad. And I think that therein lies another issue, which
Right.
I need to be careful not to start ranting about.
Passion is important.
So the final part of the interview then, George, is our 4 pertinent posers. So starting with, what advice would you give to your younger self?
What advice would I give to my younger self? I have 2 somewhat contrary pieces of advice to my younger self and to my current self, because I don't think people change that much. One, I was brand new at Ogilvy the first time, and I was working for Steve Hayden, who at the time had one of the biggest names in the business. Still does, but he was a legend in his business. He was the writer on Apple's famous 1984 spot, and he was president of Ogilvy on the IBM account. I was brand new. I didn't have a partner, and he, for whatever reason, kind of grabbed me. I was literally there less than a month. He grabbed me. There was an account in trouble. He didn't know me. He interviewed me. He hired me, but he didn't really know me. And he said, this account's in trouble. We need spots. I need you to write spots. And I came in on a weekend, and I probably wrote 60 spots. And I was nervous about, he was an email kind of guy, not a, can I have an hour at 10 o'clock kind of guy. So I was going to email him and maybe I was avoiding things. I was going to email on the spots, and I was paralyzed. And so, piece of advice number one is hit the send button. You have to get yourself, I think, to a, and I say this to my own daughters, and people in the business, young people in the business I like. You have to get yourself to the point where you believe in your good. Like, it might not be as good as you want it to be. You might not feel like heel clicky about it, but it came from you. It's good. So it's believe that your good is other people's great, and hit the send button. And the little bit of advice that might be contrary to this is know when to close the computer. So know when to say, you know what, I've done my best for the day. I actually do better creatively when I'm taking a shower or walking the dog than I do when I'm staring at my Mac. So I'm going to close the computer. I'm going to go home. I'm going to have a cup of whatever, and that's what I'm going to do. And I'm a big reader. I read a book by a guy called Eric Kandel, The Age of Insight. He's a Nobel Prize neurophysicist from Columbia, and he talks about the power of sleep and creativity. That the generative activity of your brain while you're sleeping, if you're a creative person. And I believe that. I believe I've had a good portion of my ideas come together while I'm sleeping, which is why I get into work when I was working at, usually at 6:30 or 7 in the morning. So those are two kind of companion pieces. And then when I went freelancer, when I was forced to go freelance in 2014, I heard two pieces of advice that kind of follow the same pattern, in that they're somewhat affirmative but contradictory. One was never say no to a job. And I believe that in an agency too. Never say no. You'll find time. And two is know when to press the down button. So take on a lot, but know when to leave at night. And that's a discipline and a trust in yourself that a lot of people don't have, because a lot of people compensate for their own frailty or their own insecurity by saying, well, I'm going to stay till 3 a.m. Oh, go fuck yourself. I mean, something as simple as, I do the Sunday Times crossword puzzle. It's not like your English crossword puzzles. It's not that hard, but it's pretty challenging. And I'm good at it. But there's hardly a time where I don't get better when I walk away for 20 minutes, where I don't look at it and say, I can't get a thing. And then I do the dishes, or I walk the dog, or, I buy my wife something with diamonds. And she's been a straight man to me for 40 years. I come back, and all of a sudden the things that were unclear become clear. And, that's obvious, but it takes a long time to figure out.
Yeah. And to allow yourself to do it as well, I
Yeah.
think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Number 2 is, if you could banish one thing from the industry, what would it be and why?
I think if I could banish one thing from the industry, I heard this in reference to the epidemic that in America we call the nightly news. It's segments that start with the words "I think." Because you know what? I don't really give a fuck what you think.
Yeah.
I don't give a fuck that you think clicks are important. I don't give a fuck that you think that the great metric of our age is Facebook likes. Show me a case where it worked. I was at a vaunted digital shop for 5 years. And I was told that everything from Facebook likes to QR codes to this to that were going to fundamentally change the way human beings breathe, live, act, shit, eat, everything else. And, this one guy, I was working on a brand that literally had 7% aided awareness. And this little, I'll use a Yiddish word, little pisher. It sounds like what it is. says to me, what we have to do is get Facebook likes. And I was the odd man out there because I was the one who didn't believe in shit like that. And I said to him, David, all I'm asking for, I'm not saying no. All I'm asking for is one example of one brand it had an impact for. If you can give me one example, I'll agree with you. And he looked at me like I asked him to draw and quarter his grandmother. It's like, how dare you ask for evidence? So, we've lived through as Bob Hoffman calls it, the golden age of bullshit. And the one pushback I'd have on Bob is it's a little bit like it's the golden age. Today is the golden age of bullshit and always has been. I kind of feel like, medieval alchemy will never go away. The concept of alchemy, turning something base metal into gold, will never go away. Today we call it data, or clicks, or Facebook likes, or something else. But you can't show me the money. You can't show me the gold straw. You can't turn straw into gold. I know. You can show me the science, but show me it in real life. And then you have to show me again, because anything, if it's a pharmaceutical thing, you can't just do it once. You have to show me again and again and again that you can replicate the conditions that happen, and it's not just an anomaly. There's a New Yorker cartoon, two professors or scientists looking at a equation on a board, one of those elaborate, like, Einsteinian equations, and in the middle of it they have the words, and then a miracle happened. I think we need some clarification there. I think, miracles do happen, but it's the replicability that makes it something.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's the modern day bleeding people with leeches.
Yeah.
There'll always be something, won't there? But you're right. I mean, anything that starts, I know Dave Trott's talked about this before, and he says that's the language of the consumer, not the professional. It works or it doesn't work. Don't give me subjectivity.
You hear a lot during the day. You hear a lot of received opinions as fact, and it's a little bit the malady of our age. We hear it in politics, we hear it in personal relationships, we hear it in everything. And I think we have to be a little bit, I'm not saying that we can only believe in facts, but we have to, I think, be a little more cynical. Maybe people my age, I'm 62, have an advantage because I grew up during Vietnam and Richard Nixon. So you questioned everything. We were trained to question everything, kind of as that was what I would call a classic liberal New York upbringing. If you heard, because we used to listen, my mother would have the news on at night on the radio, and they would, they would give the casualty figures from Vietnam, and they would say, 800 North Vietnamese deaths, 600 Viet Cong deaths, 400 South Vietnamese, 3 Americans. It can't be. It can't be. So, I grew up with that, saying it can't be. Show me. And I think that's a wiser way to be than, okay, that's Charlotte said it. It's got to be true. She's an SVP. No, I'm not buying it. Nothing against Charlotte. Nothing against.
No, of course not. Of course not. But the Vietnam War is a catastrophic example of believing the wrong metrics, and you may have heard of
Oh, yeah.
referred to as the McNamara fallacy, using body count as a metric for success and
for winning hearts and minds. Yeah, we're going to kill our way to peace.
Exactly.
I mean, it's not the way it works. So I mean, yes, and when actually my last big assignment at Ogilvy was for a defense contractor in horrible crisis, Boeing. And you realize that anything they said to you, it was as if Robert McNamara was your client. and that 99% of your job was saying, no, we need to get to something truer than that. What are you really doing about this problem of your planes crashing? Not that you're forming a blue ribbon committee. What are you doing? I want to see, literally, I want to see how you've redesigned every bit of code and every screw. And then I will start to believe you, because you've killed people. And I mean, thank God they fired me before I had to do the work. But you get the point.
Yeah, well, funnily enough, I mean, I shouldn't go off on another tangent here. I'm mindful of how much time I'm taking from you, George. But
Oh no, I'm enjoying this.
I actually went through the Ad Aged archives earlier, and I thought I'm going to go right back. So I've read the first few blogs that you wrote. We're going back to June 2007, and I think
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
yeah, exactly. And I think Article 2 though could have been written today, and you talk about Vonage and their churn rate and the amount they invest in online advertising, and you make a great point at the end and conclude, and it's the parallels are our kind of weird obsessive focus on short term over long term success, and you talk about how as an agency your revenue would decrease if they did what you suggested, but
Right.
your guess is in the long term you'd make even more money.
Yeah. Well, I remember that insight, or if you want to call it an insight, came from a client I worked on in the early 90s. It was a bank account. And my bosses, we were working on a big local bank in New York. They still had local banks since before everything consolidated in America. So they're a big bank, the largest retail bank in New York. And they found out that every week they gained 250,000 clients, something like that, or maybe 25,000 clients, customers. And they ran an ad about, there's a reason we gained 25,000 clients every week, something like that. It's a good ad. And I talked to my boss about it. He's a fantastic writer. He said, well, every bank gains that many customers a week because they lose that many customers a week. That's the churn of the business. And they just turned it into an advantage. But I remembered that, like, oh, okay, well, this is an interesting thing. Vonage has to keep getting new customers because they do nothing to retain customers. A little bit like an ad agency, to tell you the truth. Because I'd way rather have growth from current clients and keep getting new clients. If I were an ad agency.
Yeah, agreed, totally. Number 3 then. So aside from The Saddest Words, are there any books you can recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, I read one of the most important books I think I've ever read. I tend not to read literature these days. I tend to read nonfiction, and it's by a woman called Isabel Wilkerson. I believe she won a National Book Award for a book called The Warmth of Other Suns, about the great Black migration around World War I in America. What happened was, basically, before World War I, basically all the African Americans in the United States lived in the South. That's where they were beholden. And when jobs in the northern cities opened up, factory jobs opened up during World War I, because most of the white men were overseas, this migration up north happened. So that's when cities like Cleveland, New York, Chicago, Detroit, Kansas City, even LA, had huge influxes of African American population. So she wrote a book on that called The Warmth of Other Suns. She's just come out with a new book that got maybe the single best book review I've ever read in the New York Times. The book is called Caste with an E, and it's about the inherent racism, I'm going to say, in our shared political systems, because we were hand in glove between the slave trade and colonialism and all that. But it's the ingrained castiness of the American system, and it's pretty eye opening, because if you look at our political world in America, especially right now, through the lens of, well, some people just need to be kept down, or why does America not have universal health care? Because we don't want to pay for Black people having it. It's a shocking book. It's, if I were king, I would make it required reading. If I were working on Biden's campaign, I would force him to sit down and read it, Kamala too, because it's that important. And I have probably recommended it more than I've recommended any book except for Playboy's Party Jokes.
Yeah,
Uh,
of course, yeah.
yeah, no, it's really pretty amazing. It's not about advertising.
No, well, that's
Um,
good.
yeah, but it's about truth.
Perfect. Okay, amazing. That sounds great. We will link to that and the saddest words in this listing.
I'll send you the review from the Times, and then there's another review on the Times that has a 45-minute podcast from the author.
Ah, brilliant.
Yeah, so I'll send you those.
Yeah, please do. We'll link out to those. And then number 4, we always dedicate every episode to someone, and we bestow or hospital pass that honour, depending on your view, to our guest, who has to give the reason why. So would you kindly do the honours?
Oh, you know what? I'm going to dedicate it to Rob Schwartz. Um, Rob is just he's a big enough deal in the industry that he'd be permitted to be an asshole, and he's not. He's just a genuinely good person, and he's funny. We we've only had drinks twice, I think, or 3 times maybe, in all the time that I know him. But we do a New York, kibitz by email, probably at least once a week, where we'll um, either do Twitter jokes with each other, or we'll just send emails to each other. We reach out to each other with fairly personal things that we're dealing with sometimes, or things we're dealing with in the business or the agency or whatever. And the first 6 months, I thought Rob was trying to recruit me, and then I realized he's nicer than that. Or he's given up on me, or um, but he's just a genuinely nice. I think he's the one who connected us, and he's the one who said
Yeah,
you should go on, take my agency CEO, holding company CEO thing on the road. It's unusual, and then the last bit of my pay on to Rob is that we need more Robs in the industry, and I'll tell you why in 7 words: creative who's become a CEO. And you know what? If I was running a baseball team, I'd want a player to be manager. If I was running an automobile factory, I'd want a car enthusiast to be running a show. If I was running a restaurant, I'd want it run by a fat guy. And if I was running an agency, I'd like to be somebody. I'd like it to be run by somebody who loves what agencies do, what
yeah,
agencies make. And there's something. I think if we could, if we had a fast forward button on our Macs, if Elon Musk made a fast forward button, and we could go forward 200 years, and our 9-year-olds were sitting on our laps and saying, "Daddy, was there really a time when they put accountants in charge of advertising agencies?" I
I was about to make that point. Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of like, are you serious? They put vegetarians in charge of steakhouses? Why would they do that? But that's what's happened.
yeah. But there was a guy, except a guy called Rob.
Yeah, yeah. But when I grew up in the business, the best agencies in New York, and the same thing in the UK: Abbott Mead Vickers, BBH, Trotz agencies, Collett Dixon Pierce. Um, most of them had a creative person in the name. And back in the day, when I was young, there was something in America called the Red Book, and it was kind of a New York City phone book sized book that listed every agency, the key people at every agency, every address, and oftentimes their principal accounts. This is like pre-internet, obviously. So if you were looking for a job, you could say, "Oh, so lamp and binocular agency. These are the 3 leads. Oh, none of them are creative. I don't want to look. I don't want to work there. You'd want to work at a place, Scally, Ammirati, Alley, Levine. Those were, hot New York agencies at the time, Chiat Day, where creatives were in the lead. Now you don't have that option, of course. But there was a time in the United States, and that's how you would determine. And if there was no, I do this still. I'll look at the who we are part, because every agency is the same information architecture. If they don't have a creative person in their, their seven key people, I don't even want to talk to you. Because you're running a driving school and nobody has a license.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. Well said. It's a brilliant dedication as well. So this episode is very proudly dedicated to, well, not only fat guys who run restaurants, but to Rob Schwartz. As a final call to action, everyone listening, head over to this episode's listing, and it will be full of all the links to everything we've discussed, including the book recommendations to George's own site. How else can people get more George Tannenbaum in their lives?
Well, they can send a check to my home address. I think I'm pretty easy to find. I'm pretty, starting up my own business has turned me into, and I've written about this in the past, turned me into a little bit of a fiend on social media. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, and I probably get 20 friend requests, whatever they call them, connection requests a week. And I put all my blog stuff on LinkedIn and some occasional nasty stuff. That's the best thing, my site and all that stuff. But my blogs become my voice, except for the my CEO. And yeah, that's become my voice. So that's what I do. Teaching, again at Ad House in the fall. And come visit. I'm living up in Connecticut as long as we're under disease lockdown. So come visit me in Connecticut. Yeah, it's horrible here. Yeah.
Oh man. Oh, well, George, it's been an absolute pleasure and a blast, and I've loved it.
Likewise, Giles. Yeah, let's do it again.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, and thank you to everybody listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do share it and review the pod. Keep questions and guest requests coming in. To get in touch, it's easy to find Gasp online. You can check out CTA Pod on Instagram, or just email hello@calltoaction.co.
I can't get no call to action. I can't get no call to action, but I try. And I try, and I try, and I try.